Welcome back to the Runs podcast. We have been joined all the way from Boston by Luke Maher. Luke, thank you very much for giving us some time. We finally got this episode over the line. How are you doing? You okay?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks for having me, guys. I'm really excited to be chatting with you today.
That's fine. Great.
Pleasure to have
Obviously, you've got a massive role to play with Puma now and Project 3. But what we want to do, obviously, first, what we do with all our guests is let's flash all the way back to school in your running career. And then we'll work our way back up to what you're doing with Puma now and how Project 3 looks and how it's worked and how it's going to work. So, in school, were you very active? Were you a runner?
Yeah, definitely very active growing up. One of four siblings, older brother, younger sister, and a younger brother. My dad was a lifelong runner. My mom was a swimmer, transformed to a runner. Played all the usual sports here in the U.S. growing up. Did American football, did soccer, baseball, basketball. And it wasn't really until like middle school, so probably like 12 years old, that I got into running. Simply, my brother was running in high school and kind of convinced me to maybe try it out. And so in kind of the middle school here in system in the US, I was like, let me throw my cap in the ring and see what I can do. And eventually, kind of really, really got the bug and started loving it. Ran all 4 years of high school here. Cross country, indoor track, outdoor track. Indoor track in the US is really popular. So it's nice to have like all 3 seasons and everything. And, went to running camps growing up in high school during the summers. And it was kind of towards the end of high school where I think my love turned into like an obsession. I was able to convince my parents to let me go spend some time in Kenya in the summer, and spent, pretty much a whole entire summer living in E10 with one of my, good friends that I had met at running camp. And saw obviously a whole nother part of the world, which was super exciting and interesting. And also exposed to, the highest level of running possible, which was super cool. I remember that first summer, it was like right before David Rudisha kind of took the, track by storm over the coming years, and was super fortunate to meet him at St. Patrick's High School when he was being coached by Brother Colm, who's one of the legendary coaches in the sport. And there's David just kind of washing his laundry in the St. Patrick's schoolyard. And later that summer goes on to run at least 142. And so my mom still has this iconic photo of me kind of just sitting with him while he's doing his laundry that she has at her house. And it still makes me laugh to this day. But and subsequently over high school and throughout the university time, I ran for like a Division III in the NCAA system here in the U.S. up in Boston, and would keep going back to Kenya over the summers throughout university just because kind of fell in love, and it was the place to be for training.
Kenya camps are very, very popular now. Everyone's doing it. Was it popular then, or were you breaking the mold a little bit?
Yeah, so this was like 2000, probably like late 2000s, 2008, 2009. Obviously, there was a large, I know Team GB had spent time there at certain points as training camps, and, definitely a lot of Europeans, not a lot of, I'd say American or folks on that side of the globe. Definitely not as many people as young as I was there. And back then too, I don't think E10 was on the map as it is now. No. It was also, I think just the way social media and everything is this nowadays, it's so much easier for people to connect and see that space, where I still remember like taking, a Mutatu to Eldoret and, dial up internet to get onto Facebook to talk to friends back home or something like that. At like an internet cafe where, now phones or just Wi-Fi is so much more available. So I think obviously that exposure has, and I think as people have come to find like, this is one of the places to be if I want to put in really good quality months of training, or, get out of the cold of the UK or the US and spend a couple weeks training at a high level. And that's, across the board to, the everyday runner who's excited for an adventure to the sub-elite to the top professionals of the world. So, yeah.
That was just born out of obsession as well then. It must be like, when you think about it, running high school in America is such a different experience to running comprehensive school in the UK.
Yeah.
Because you haven't got. It's not a. It'd be fair to say it's not a proper sport in schools, Nick, in the UK, right?
No, it's not. It's not as. It's not. I don't even think unless you go to like a university where it's a sports university, and we got like Cardiff, it's close to us. Nottingham is a big one. But yeah, apart from that, there's not many. But that's sort of university age. So that's after school. That's like 16 or 18-year-olds when you go to a proper sports school and you start doing athletics. I don't know what it's like for juniors that are really good, whether they get taken and put in places. I don't think so. Though. Like US, obviously you've got the collegiate system. I know with the NCAA and things, so it's a lot bigger.
Yeah. No, in the high school system in the US, it's, I think especially where I grew up in New York State in the US, and, a lot, like, for example, like indoor track season, a lot of my indoor meets were at the New York City Armory, which is like, a legendary indoor track facility. And, I was going there as a high schooler, week in, week out, which is kind of wild to think about nowadays, especially when I talk to people from outside of the US or the Northeast of the US, and they're like, whoa, you've been to the Armory? I'm like, yeah, I was running dual meets there, or like late Friday night meets. Yeah, exactly. So, and I think it's interesting too, because it's, we would be in season from August to June in the high school system here in the US, and then you had the summers to train a little bit, but it was kind of a full year adventure.
Yeah. I think that leans into it being cooler at that age as well, because it's available in school, because you've got them Friday night meets and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You almost have to break the mold, and it's happening a lot more now, but you've actually got to get off your ass in the UK and go to a club or go to a meet or whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas not so much is forced down you in school, but it's a viable option that you can't escape in school. Whereas it's not in the UK. I think that's the major difference, isn't it?
Yeah, and what I've come to value in terms of the UK system, and obviously I'm an outsider and haven't experienced it, but from talking with folks who've been part of it, what I found interesting and nice is it seems like a lot of folks also join a club from their local town or city or whatever, and have that connection from when they're a young athlete until maybe they're a master's athlete, so 40, 50. So like you create relationships with people who you carry with you throughout life. And, remember when you were maybe doing a one lapper around the track when you were like 6 to, doing a 10 mile or a half marathon. And I think that's one of the trade-offs I see is like, that community, which is great that you get to, get exposed to people who, might not be from your high school or your team. You're getting exposed to people who are older or younger, and just get to meet and know more people throughout your journey through the sport, which I think is great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry if you're going to hear the dog. He's outside chewing a bottle.
No, you're good.
And then you go off to college then?
Yeah, so I ran for 4 years at the NCAA D3 level, which was really awesome. A liberal arts school here right outside of Boston called Tufts University, and really, really enjoyed the experience. It was great to be with folks who also love to run, and continued going to Kenya during the summers, and then kind of got to, end of college and was like, what do I want to do? And, I knew I loved running in the sport, and started just like, hey, maybe I can go this coaching route. I had awesome coaches when I was at university. And so I was like, maybe this is the path for me. And was able to get an assistant coaching gig at another small, like D3 NCAA institution, kind of about 2 hours west of Boston in, Western Massachusetts, with a super pretty area, great area to be a runner. And spent about 5 years at a school called Amherst College, and then another 5 years at another small D3 liberal arts school. And that was really transformative. It was awesome to work with athletes in that capacity, and really, really exciting. And, got to hone my craft as a coach and learn more about myself as, the coaching side of the sport, which was really excellent. And, I think the nice thing about the university system is working with athletes, obviously from a training perspective, but, learning who they are on and off the track, and, helping them guide themselves through a pivotal point in their life, which was, really, really awesome as well too. So.
Were you going into that young as well, Luke? Or...
Yeah. So,
I can hear you, the alarm.
No, you're good.
His dog set the alarm off, is it?
Oh, blink neck. Bloody hell. Sorry, Luke.
No, you're good.
Were you going into that young, or is it a lot of young people going into that field in America?
Yeah,
around
it's an interesting system because it's a little bit of like a system where you got to unfortunately take some time to maybe break the glass ceiling, or it's a little bit of a system too sometimes where like maybe someone got a job because they knew someone at the school or something like that, and but I think what I enjoyed working at like the NCAA D3 level, where performance and athleticism was still really high. These individuals and these student athletes still really cared about maybe what they were studying in the classroom or what they were doing in the community. So you had folks who were, we had athletes who were running very, very competitive times at the NCAA D3 level, but at the same time, these were really smart, studious individuals who, were thinking about, life beyond maybe university, which, I think was really fun and exciting to be part of, maybe their 4, 2, 3, 1 year, part of coaching them. And, felt fortunate to be able to like kind of serve as that individual to help kind of guide them through, as we all, we were all 18 to 21 years old at one point. And it's like kind of like a time where you're like, oh, I'm kind of getting older, but I'm also kind of like, a bit of a knucklehead. And how do I like figure out this next step, or, especially what I loved is, seeing kids succeed and also helping them figure out, when, the going got tough, or, you hit a roadblock with training or racing, how do we navigate that murky water or that, roadblock and get to that next level of success, or have that good day or that great race. That's what was really fun to me and enjoyable in that aspect as well too. So.
Yeah, the problem solving side of it as well.
Yeah. The problem solving was always fun. And, I think it takes people, I always felt like it always takes a people person, because, you have to understand that these people aren't robots. They're humans. They have emotions. They have feelings. They have things that are concerned, like all of us do. We have things that, that's why we love running, because it gives us an outlet to put that stuff aside and, just go and rip a run or a workout or a race. And, they're the same thing. They're 18 to 21-year-olds who are, dealing with problems in life and using the sport for, the enjoyment, but also the pursuit of something higher. And
No, I absolutely agree with that. It is a people person role, and we've spoke about it quite a lot, and I don't want to dig into it too much now, but it seems like at the moment with the social media and the internet and everything, if you can run a 5K, you think you can be a good coach as well. It's not the case. It has to be that problem solving element of it. It can't be, oh, have you tried this because this is what I want to do. You have to understand the athlete a lot more as well, don't you?
Yeah, I learned early on too, like, I think when I went into coaching first year or two, I was like very naive in the sense of like, well, this is what worked for me as a college athlete. Like, this is what my coach gave me to be really successful. And of course, some of those things are helpful and beneficial, but you're only going to be a good coach by understanding that, hey, what might work for Nikki might not work for you, Gar, and what might work for Gar might not work for Nikki. And, it doesn't mean you're coming up with 30 different training plans, but it's, hey, how can I, over the course of a week or a training cycle or a month, meet the needs of my individual athletes and, get them to be where they were and really just build their confidence too. That's the most important piece at the end of the day. I always told kids I'd rather have a stretch of training that was B+ at best than a week that's A+, another week that's a C, another week that's a B, and then it's just like up, down, up, down. Like, we're not trying to do anything fancy or, rip a workout that we saw, Grant Fisher do. It's like, we know what we need to do, and let's go forth and do that and execute that at the best ability and level that each individual can. And, collectively, a rising tide lifts all boats. So,
Brilliant.
So what dragged you away from coaching, I guess, and made that switch to a completely different role with Puma now, right?
Yeah, I definitely didn't leave coaching for any negative reason. It was super enjoyable. I think just being very much passionate about the running world and the professional side of the sport, and, had the opportunity to, join Puma a little over 3 years ago. Part of it too was personal. My, now wife, was living in Boston. We were kind of doing long distance, and, you get to that point in life where you got to make adult decisions and figure out the next step. And, that was kind of that choice, which don't regret at all. And being able to spend more time with her and, have a little more balance. And so, joined Puma about 3 years ago, and, super fortunate because I think it marked a time too where the brand and performance running for Puma has, very quickly and excitingly just continued to go up and up. And, whether it's product, whether it's athletes, whether it's just brand recognition in general. So, a really exciting time to be part of the brand and be, a small piece in a really, really, really big puzzle of people from, development to product to innovation to all across the board. It's a team effort that, has been part of, maybe the recent collective success of whether footwear or product or whatever it may be, or just simply people knowing more about Puma running in general.
Yeah, because I've been very derogatory about Puma in the past on this podcast, right?
Yeah.
And people will tell you that I have. And it's not so much the function side of it, it's the fashion side of it for me. I've always said, if it's not Puma Disc, if it's not Puma King, I don't care.
Yeah.
So when Puma 3 came round, I was really a little bit skeptical, but also a bit kind of excited to see what it was all about. Where's Project 3 come from? Have a lot of you sat down and thought about it? Is it your baby? What is Project 3 and why did it become Project 3?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a collective effort. I'm just one of many people on the team who plays a role in kind of what we are doing from a day-to-day standpoint. There's so many people involved from the product side, the innovation side, the marketing side who have made, like whether it's Project 3 or just Puma Running becoming more recognizable and favored in the consumer's mind. But we saw kind of that there was a niche audience of we have a super strong athlete roster, and we also have this really great product. And as you guys know, you go to major marathons and you see top athletes compete and crush it, and obviously people are wearing many different types of footwear, and but I'm sure as you guys know too, there's especially at these world majors, there's that collective audience or group of people who shortly after the pros finish and who are, again, as we're talking about, this sub-elite community of individuals who have these amazing stories because they're maintaining a 9 to 5, or they just recently graduated university and they're like, man, I want to try the marathon thing, or they're a master's runner, 40, 50 years old and have been doing this for 40, 50 years and are still crushing it. And maybe not necessarily getting the support from the running community as a whole, just because obviously there's so many people, which is awesome nowadays. The number of people who are joining the sport and picking it up, I think, is amazing. And it's amazing to see the community grow from, what it is to what it is now. And so I think that's super exciting. But we just saw that, there's this collective group of individuals who make up that sub-elite community, not just, in the US, but collectively. They're everywhere. They're doing things and maintaining a balance of family and life and work, and somehow still running, 80, 90, 100 plus miles and running times, some of the top people in the program or just, that we've interacted with are times maybe 10, 15 years ago where you're making a national team or you're, vying for a top 10 spot at a world major. And, both because of product and footwear and, the sport just getting faster in general, it's, you're maybe a little bit outside that realm, but you're still a really talented athlete. So we, over a little over a year plus ago, we were like, how can we, maybe resonate and connect with this community? Because, compared to maybe, which is obviously, again, a really big thing nowadays is the influencer in the creator space. We kind of said too that people who are in this community are kind of like influencers in their own sense, because they're maybe part of, a local run community or their local club. And, they look at, let's just use Nicky as an example because he's here, of like, oh, it's like, that's that guy Nicky, man. He runs so fast in the marathon. And maybe I'm a younger athlete or a new individual to the sport. So I might look up to them and be like, whoa, that's cool. Like, what's this guy doing? I want to know what his training is. And, we've all been influenced before. So it's like, oh, Nicky's wearing a pair of Puma running shoes. It's like, great. Like, I got to go to Puma UK and buy a pair, or some local run specialty shop and pick up one because, this guy's legit. So like, let me go do that. So we kind of had this idea of like, okay, these folks are, influencers in their own right. They're, leaders in their community from the running side, or, people who are resonating and bringing other folks together because of their pursuit for, a higher level of performance, or just, pushing themselves, while also doing whatever it is they do professionally from a, job side and family side and life side. And we also figured, how do we give these folks an experience where, they get to see, like, kind of peel back the layers a little bit, and get to see, like, what's it like inside of a brand, and learn more about it. And I think especially for folks who were part of that first program, where, from a brand side, we took a really big risk by giving all these folks this new shoe, the Fast R3, that, a lot of times brands are very, tight about embargoes and releases. And, these athletes, alongside our pro athletes, were able to get the Fast R3 before anyone else ever touched it, and got to put it on their feet and go after it. And, then collectively go to Boston and London Marathon and, in a way, represent the brand. And, you saw last year at Boston and London, this just swarm of these orange jerseys and these white, blue, red Fast R3s cruising by. And, collectively, everyone just crushed it. Even, London was a little warm. Boston was kind of perfect, actually, but still a bit warm. And, but along the way, we didn't want to just necessarily be like, hey, here's some shoes, here's some kit, go out there, we'll throw some cash at you. How can we also, whether it's educate, provide an experience, give program? And so I think one of the cool things we've done is being able to, bring folks into the fold of the Puma running family, and let them hear and interact with, people from our innovation side, who are the ones in our laboratory, Nitro Lab, who are, working on footwear and developing footwear. The individuals who are, our product line managers, so PLMs, who are, shepherding footwear along from start to finish, with ideation to the handoff to, the market. Also hear from our athletes, the fact that they get to just maybe just hear a conversation of like, hey, this is what Rory Linkletter or Charlotte Purdue or, Dakota Popane, goes through in a build up. Not many people get that encounter as well. And we've also, for all the programs, we've had an awesome individual who's provided sports psychology, as well as nutrition. And, we've had great nutrition partners in Morton. So again, a really collective group effort to give folks who put out a lot and train a lot and might not necessarily get the exposure as, a top level athlete or a big, influencer or creator gets, but also give them something hopefully that's memorable and enjoyable. And, whether they love the shoe and, continue to be Puma running for the rest of their life, or they, hey, I really like the shoe, but I also like these respective shoes too. That's great too. At the end of the day, we know, we're not going to convert 200 plus people immediately to Puma footwear, but, to your point, Gar, earlier, of like, at least we give some exposure. So maybe the next time you go to a shop, you're like, hey, I really enjoyed that Fast R3. They're coming out with that new velocity. Maybe they try that out for like my everyday trainer,
Yeah.
So
that's what I was going to say. That was some of my favorite part of it, like the insight and the circle calls we were having weekly. That was just so good, and it made you feel sort of like an athlete, if you want. It made you feel like you're getting all this insight and help and everything towards just a normal person who loves the running, and then I'm getting all this help from like yourselves, nutritionists, psychologists, actual athletes, and then the information we had about the shoe. Obviously, we were allowed to wear it at race and things beforehand, but it felt like so special, like the first time. I know it's a bit different this time because it's the same shoe, but still, that felt so. It was like a dream come true. Honestly, it was. I know, just saying that because it was unbelievable to be part of that. And do you know, like, was the Fast Athlete obviously well in development? Was that the part of an idea as well to tie it together then with this project to release it at the same time?
Yeah, I think it was. I think we were looking at it of like, we had Fast R3, we had like these races coming up, spring majors, and we have this great roster of athletes. So we were almost like, hey, we've checked all of these boxes, but maybe there's like one more that we can check of like, how do we go to a moment in time and, when we're releasing the shoe, say, confidently at the end of the day that we really owned the launch and release of this new footwear. And so, for example, on we had this Project 3 bucket of individuals and these athletes going after it. Our whole PR and media team was working with, some pretty influential creators and, people in that side of the sport who came into our lab and did testing and were able to show, hey, Fast R3 is faster than X model. And so, that was all set up and ready to go. And then we had, this amazing moment in Boston and London of activation and marketing events where, again, all the day, it kind of released this really cool, perfect storm of like, within 2 weeks, the world went from knowing nothing about Puma running
Yeah.
to, all of a sudden people are like, wait a minute, this shoe, the Fast R3 is supposedly the fastest shoe in the world. And people are referencing the Outside Magazine article and, people are seeing these results. And, so, people are seeing like big name influencers like Ben is Running and other people in the sport on that side who are being like, yeah, this shoe is crazy. And of course, that's exactly what we wanted, to people to start talking about it. And, I think we're seeing still those collective efforts now of everyone from the whole team, working on this to, I think we look at it as a whole. Project 3 was one piece of that, but now, it just, I know, and I'm sure you guys hopefully have seen it too, just more people wearing Puma at races that you go to, whether it's here in the US or, in your guys' neck of the woods as well too.
It was unbelievable after obviously that, and through the summer then with me racing them, like the amount of people, even just from my friends, who were like, I gotta get them. But then nobody could get them. They were just selling out so quick. It was crazy. And still now, like every time they release, they're just selling out like straight away. But even the Deviate, like the Elite, like people are loving them as well. Like a couple of my mates, like Bull and Jamie, like really good runners. They love them as well. Like it's gone really well.
Yeah. No, that's the great thing too. Like we launched Deviate Nitro Elite, just a few months ago, started this year. And, I think what we've really tried to do is make sure we're not cannibalizing one or the other, because we know also at the end of the day, some different shoes work for different people. And being able to meet the needs of the high performance needs of all athletes is really, really important. So, yeah.
What was the mood like? Because again, Puma have brought this shoe almost out of nowhere from their previous shoes, really, isn't it? It's like it's a much better shoe than they were creating beforehand. Is that fair?
It was a big step, I think. Sorry, shoe, wasn't it? And I was proven.
Yeah. What was the mood like around Puma when you were trying to keep this a secret and you knew this shoe existed and no one else did?
Yeah, it was definitely like it's a good question. There was a lot of like trepidation.
Because you still don't know. It's still got to be proved.
Yeah, it takes a lot of risk. We obviously put a lot of trust too in the folks who are part of Project 3 to be like, hopefully we get a lot of PBs. Like we want people to PR or like have really good performances. But the tough part about our sport too is like, a marathon, you might get one shot a year, and some people have bad days, or, it's, bad weather, and, it could be, we've seen Boston marathons where it's 40 and raining, or, the same thing in London. So like, it could just be a bad day, and maybe the footwear just, it's great, but it doesn't get a chance to shine. So, so many things outside of our control, which is, again, you can only control what you can control. I think, as we moved along, we were very excited because, I think, Nikki can attest to it. It was great to see some folks, at that level who were reporting back like, wow, this is great. Or, I just had this amazing session in this shoe or, something along those lines. So there was these little checkpoints along the way where you're like, okay, like it seems like it's going well. It seems like these people are liking the shoe, no one's coming back being like, oh my God, this is garbage. Like get it off my feet. But again, there's still just the risk of, hey, and you never know too what your competitors are doing. Maybe someone could have come out with a competitive brand could have come out with a shoe, and we don't, and we also don't own these moments. We're not the sponsor of a Boston Marathon or a London Marathon, so you're a little bit trying to prove your worth and strut your stuff at maybe a show that you don't own or something. So
no. And I was going to ask you about the selection process, but you've answered it already. But that was my favorite part of it, because when Nicky came back and told me that he got in, I thought, oh, all right, maybe it's because you said you're on a podcast or something, because I don't know why they've picked you. Because in my mind, I was thinking, oh, you've got 269 runners. filter it by Instagram followers and pick the first 269. But that wasn't the case, and it's not the case this year around, because last week we had Hannah Leggett on. She's got like 700 odd followers. We've had James Cook on, who is not massive following either. What are you looking for in a Project 3 athlete?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's definitely not about social media following. I think for us, I think, of course, there's a performance aspect to it. We recognize that. There is that metric of a certain time to be in order to apply. But I think there's also something to be said of, there's a wide spectrum of athlete across the top end to, there's folks, whether it's Boston and London or Boston and London this year, who are running low 2 teens. There's, I just saw Alex Milne, a UK athlete who just won, the world 50K champs as a 211 guy. And he did Project 3 last year and he's in the program this year. And, but there's also some amazing stories and amazing individuals who, are running 220, they're running 230, they're running 240, they're running 250, they're just under 3 hours. But, and it could be a myriad of things, whether they've dealt with personal setbacks or health issues, or they, are masters runners and they're just still crushing it at, 40, 50, 60 years old. It was cool in New York because it was the world, world age championship. I might be butchering. Yeah. So we had a really cool swath of individuals who, different ages in the sport and masters runners. And, if we were hey, it's whether it's following or purely totally performance-based time, we might miss out on supporting some of these individuals who, deserve a little support along the way and, a little pat on the back or just, some recognition. And so, I think, it's been super awesome, the response and the excitement for folks. And of course, at the end of the day, we would love to take more people, but the bandwidth and the team is stretched thin and working really hard. But it's definitely not just a one size fits all model. I think we want to make sure that, we're finding folks who, are really interested and excited about it, who have that performance base, but also, again, not necessarily a 210 or 211 marathoner, but maybe they're 245 and, they have dealt with some tough personal setbacks or, maybe that was their first marathon out and they just crushed it. And they're like, I don't know what I can do in this sport. I literally, barely trained and now I'm, hooked. What can I do next? And, that's a cool aspect of it as well. Cause I'm sure some of you guys I've been a runner my whole life and, I sometimes forget about that, that mentality or that, belief in yourself when you first set out on something such as a new sport and new endeavor. And, it's pretty exciting and, you want to just grip it and go. So, definitely some defined characters of what we're looking for, but also, we want to be mindful of what's beneath the surface and how can we learn more about these people and, maybe, help some folks out along the way too.
I think very similar to this podcast and the Project 3 situation, Project 3 itself, what's made both of these successful is relatability. You picked athletes that have got relatability to customers. And we have, when we had Rory Linkletter on, me and Nikki were gassed.
Yeah.
No one cared, in the nicest possible way. Yeah. But they cared about, like you said, those 9-to-5 runners, those James Cooks that are working 12-hour shifts and fitting 20 milers in before or after. The Lucy Joneses that were still working when they were on Project 3.
Yeah.
That's who they want. That's who they care about. I don't know how many of our listeners bought Fast R3s after Nikki spoke about them, but I do know it was a lot. Wasn't it?
It was a few, yeah.
I'll get a check in the mail for him. I'll get him his copy.
You can get me a beer in Boston, I'll do.
Exactly.
But runaway success, I mean, you paid out $161,000 in fees for obviously winners and achievable and stuff like that. That's a drop in the ocean to a marketing campaign to sell that many shoes, right?
Yeah, I think, again, it goes back to the experience we wanted to provide of, similar to competitive top level athletes, whether they're getting in a PB or they're finishing in the top 10 at a race, you are getting, potentially paid from the New York City Marathon or the Boston Marathon. So, how can we almost be a little cheeky and exciting and be like, hey, yeah, if you are the top finisher male and top finisher female and the athlete with the biggest PB, and if you smash your PB by 3 minutes, yeah, we'll give you some cash. And, it's, I think it was kind of cool because on one hand, people are like, yeah, that was like definitely like an exciting and luring factor to doing this. Cause, maybe someone was like, yeah, I know I'm fit. I know I can like smash my PB by 3 minutes. But people also, which I appreciated as well, they were like, maybe that was my initial like hook to like try and dip my feet in the water and see if I could do this. But also they were like, I didn't realize too after like, maybe going through the program of, it was kind of cool to be part of something bigger than myself. And that was like also a little bit of a motivational factor as well of like, I think sometimes, especially older in life, it's not often, that you're competing in a competitive environment as like a quote unquote team or, a group setting. And so I think, when people, I remember talking to a few folks after New York City this past fall where they were like, yeah, we came off one of the bridges and we saw, I saw someone else wearing the Project 3 like purple Puma singlet, and then I saw another person, and we were able to just kind of link up for a few miles, and like it served as that factor of like, okay, we all know like that tough point of a race, or just you're going through the highs and the lows of like whether you have your mate next to you or someone you've just been kind of grinding it out. It's super helpful just to like clear your mind and pull you through a bad patch. And, it was kind of cool for me to hear that. Like, oh yeah, we linked up, we saw the Puma singlets and we just ran for a bit, and, eventually maybe people faded off, but like, at least there was that collective bond and that energy of like, in quotes, like a teammate out there with you.
It was
like that was really nice to hear.
It was like that in London last year. Every time you seen an orange vest, it was so distinctive. And it was brilliant. As you said, I ran with a couple of people and met a few after at the finish line, and like you just had that something together. I know everyone there has as well the marathon, but it was like I felt drawn to go over and speak to people because I knew they'd been in the same boat as me, and that was pretty cool.
Yeah, and I think too it was nice to hear from of course. Did everyone set a PB? No, but like people came up and were like, hey, it was at least. It gave me again that motivational factor, and it pushed me, but it also was just like there's something to be said for like the love of the game and the pursuit of it, of just like hey, you're not always going to strike a PB, you're not always going to knock it out of the park or have an A+ day, but I think again being part of something community based or larger than themselves made them feel like okay, yeah, maybe I missed my PB by a minute or a couple seconds or whatever, but there was still something enjoyable and something I could take away from this moment, and feel pretty satisfied with myself, or at least happy. And, of course, it's always stinks when we don't have our best days out there, but we know the marathon's a tough game, and, it's
so many factors.
Sometimes you get 1 or 2 shots a year, and that's it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Did Project 3 go as you thought it was going to go, or was that a bit above your wildest dreams outcome? I'm only from our point of view. You're on the other side, right? We've seen it from a consumer point of view, watching it unfold in real time. I think it might be one of the best marketing campaigns of the 21st century. I know it was more than a marketing campaign as well.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of us who lived and breathed it for a long time. I think when you're in, you sometimes have the blinders on because you're just, we're super passionate about trying to provide like a top level experience and program for folks who, don't often get something like this. So that's like always our driving force at the end of the day. And of course we're going to make mistakes, or, there's going to be, bumps along the road, of course. But I think collectively it, for me at least, exceeded expectations. And I think part of it is like, you're your own worst critic. You're always like, I'm always us as a whole, the team, we obviously were working hard and trying to mitigate as many, mess ups or calamities as possible. Cause, you want to put forth the best product possible, in terms of a program. And, I think again, what I've really enjoyed is, like being exposed and getting to meet, people in this community of running. I think that's like the awesome thing about this sport is like, now I know people where like, a year ago, I didn't know who Nikki was, but now I'll see him if I see him at a major marathon, I'm like, oh yeah, I know this guy. And other people are part of the program as well too, who, have been part of it. I think that's the really, really cool thing. And, people talking about it with each other, but also just, people feeling like they got this like community-based experience. And so, yeah, I would say it definitely exceeded expectations. It definitely took some time to like recognize and, be like, we really did a great job. But I think also with anything, myself included, and I think my wife would agree that, it's definitely not complacent. We always want to, how can we like do more? How can we like, keep moving the needle forward? Because, I love being in a competitive environment. That's why I love the sport of running and, being able to work in this. But, at the end of the day, there's awesome brands out there and everyone's trying to, win the hearts and minds of a consumer. And so we always have to just keep, thinking about, what does the consumer and what does the runner want? And that's many different people. And that's the great thing about the sport too. There's many different ways, whether you're just someone who's like, hey, I love running twice a week, or I just love doing park run, and that's good. And that's great. That's awesome. Or it's like, hey, I do running and I do high rocks, and it's like awesome. Or it's like, hey, I've never missed a day of running in the last like 6 years. And it's like, dang, that's crazy. And then you have folks who are, on the professional end, to like the folks who are just missing that professional end, to, the masters runners who's been doing it for the last 50, 60 years and just gets out there and runs 30 minutes a day. And so I think, compared to any other sport in the world, like there's nothing like the sport of running.
No.
And I think that's what's so cool. And, something, we can't take for granted at the end of the day. And it's fun to play a small role in a really big, slice of it, because it is a lot of fun. So.
Yeah, absolutely. This year, obviously, like Nicky said earlier, we haven't got the secret shoe to entice everyone in, but you haven't had to entice everyone in as much, I guess, because the proof is in the pudding from last year as well. Applications are up this year, right?
Yeah, we had again, awesome group of folks. We're getting excited. It's like that funny time of like 5-6 weeks out for their respective races. Obviously, folks have been given DVD Elite 4 and Fast Start 3. Again, no big new exciting thing to come. But, we do have some fun stuff that, people will see come race day. Can't give away too many secrets, but yeah, I think, I think it's great to see how people are more familiar with the brand too, as well. I think that, again, a little bit proof in the pudding of like, now people are like, oh yeah, I wore Fast Start 3 for my PB, this past fall at such and such race. And it's like, well, okay, maybe we didn't have that, affect the year prior. And so I think also thinking about how we can continue supporting these individuals and working with these individuals, and, not making it a flash in the pan and making it, something sustainable. I think that's also important too, because as we've been talking, there's so many wonderful individuals in the sport, and as particularly in this sub-elite community as we're talking about this specific topic. But we're 5-6 weeks out, knock on wood, hopefully some good weather, both at Boston and London. We're going to show up really big at both races, and have a lot of exciting things planned, especially London this year. We have some really cool, fun events happening. So yeah.
Yeah. And it's been a massive success, and it's been helpful for us as a podcast as well, because obviously Nicky is Project 3 alumni. Then we've been here last year. Obviously, we got Hannah on and James on. We've got others lined up because it's a nice, easy in. And Nicky done it last year. Do you want to come and have a chat about it as well? So we speak about the sub-elite. I ran 6:11 in Manchester last year. It was my own fault. I didn't train properly. I'm looking for 4:20, 4:30 this year. Is the Fast R3 a good shoe for someone trying to run 4:30 and a heel striker, or would you recommend against it? Honest talk.
Yeah, honest talk. Like, to me, I think growing up in the sport, I was someone who always went to run specialty, and like, was like, hey, you got really flat feet, Luke. You need like a really structured shoe, and you need like all the bells and whistles, and the insoles and all that stuff. And to me, like, I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Like, yeah, I got really flat feet. Like, I need that stuff. And, I think as I became more of a runner and learned more about just like how I work as a runner, realize like, oh, okay, let me try this other shoe. Like, it's maybe not like a structured shoe, but maybe this is good for me. And, it might sound like baloney or just fluff, but like, I think really what comes down to it is how comfortable are you in that shoe when you're out there racing.
Yeah.
And if the
No,
Fast R3 works for you and you're going to try and run 4 hours, then yeah. Is it a really aggressive shoe, and is it going to push you up on your toes, and is it going to work your body in a different way maybe than some other models of footwear? For sure. That's definitely the case. But again, every body's different, every person's different, and everybody prefers different things when it comes to footwear. That's look at the market right now.
Yeah.
How many people are wearing all kinds of different stuff? So we've seen the emergence of new brands every year, and people are getting into them. And I think that's the cool thing too, is that there's something out there for everyone.
For everyone, yeah.
And I think what we've tried to do too is we have Fast R3, we have DB Elite, two different models of footwear for sure. But it might work for one person, it might work for another person. Both shoes might work for the same person. And I think, we've really strived hard to not cannibalize one or the other, because again, realizing that, based off feel and just comfortability, the Fast R3 might be the shoe for you, or you might put on the DB 4 and be like, yeah, you know what, this is good for me too. Or
that's it.
Yeah. So like for me, it goes down to really the comfort level. Of course, there's the nuts and bolts and the X's and O's of the shoe and the science behind it. But at the end of the day, it's how the consumer feels when they put on that shoe. And as long as it fits right, you're not falling off. It's not falling off your feet. Then I feel like nowadays we see people we've seen people running marathons in slip-on sandals, and Crocs. And,
world records in Crocs.
Exactly.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, because I ran London in Mizuno Pro Rebellion 2s, and everyone would look at me, Nick, and say, well, how can you run on them? They're like boats, isn't they? They just go back and forth.
Yeah.
But they work perfectly for me.
Yeah,
the shoe
exactly.
is just whatever shoe
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
True.
Amazing.
Yeah.
You must be getting your passport ready now, Luke, for a bit of busy period now.
Yeah, April will be super busy. We'll have Boston and London. I'll literally fly from Boston Monday night to head to London for the following week. And I'm super excited. I'm super fortunate that, this is work. And get ready for a big spring of marathon season. Super fortunate because it will be like a big push. And then my wife and I are going to welcome our first child in the summer. So it's very exciting. So
big year.
Yeah. So big year. Looking forward to kind of a big last work trip before summer hits and life slows down a little bit, but also speeds up a lot as well too. So yeah.
Brilliant.
Definitely. Nicky's going to be out in Boston, isn't you?
Oh, let's go.
I'm running Boston. Yeah, can't wait. 4 weeks.
Yeah.
4 weeks, not long.
Exactly.
Has the
we're
snow
looking
gone
forward to it. Yeah. All the snow's gone, thankfully.
Snow's
we had
gone.
2 massive snowstorms this winter where we probably got at least first one was 1.5 feet of snow, and then the second one was 2+ feet of snow.
Crazy.
It wasn't up until maybe last week that it all melted. So yeah.
Good. Can't wait.
No excuse. No, I
got no excuses. Can't wait.
And then, he'll be in London cheering me on the week after as well, then.
I'll be there. I'll be out there. I'll have a cold beer for you ready at the finish line.
Yeah, I'll be supporting in London, so I'll be supporting Gar. So I'm Boston, he's London, so we're going to have a good week.
Good. Yeah, that's a good action-packed back-to-back.
Yeah, it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Luke, thanks for giving us some time. It's so interesting, especially from the marketing point, the side and everything. I think I do stand corrected on Puma now, and we'll add the Nitros into the discs and the Puma Kings as well. But it looks like I said, that Fast R3 has done its job, but also kicked on to the rest of the Nitro range as well, and shown a positive light back onto Puma in the running world as well, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's been super exciting, and again, a huge collective effort from everyone here at Puma, total team effort, and everyone's been working really hard to have a positive impact on the performance running and just the running community in general. So we're really excited about what we have right now, but also really excited about the future and what it holds. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I hope Project 3 is a runaway success again as well. I hope I run my 4:30 in London, and then next year I can get down to maybe 2:57 and try and get into Project 3. But Nick, have I missed anything?
No, that was brilliant. Thanks for your time, Luke. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, no, thanks, guys. I really, really appreciate it as well, too. It's great catching up and chatting.
Yeah, absolutely. Nick, you can wrap it up if you want then.
Yeah, that's another episode of The Runs with Luke this week, all the way from Boston Project 3. Thanks again, Luke, for your time. And we will see you on a start line somewhere soon.